The hospital corridor smelled faintly of disinfectant and wilted lilies. Lila stood motionless outside the private ward, her trembling fingers clutching the wedding band she had slipped off hours ago. The metal was cold, like the voice that had just spoken her name without recognition. Inside, the man on the bed looked like her husband but didn't feel like him. Ethan Zhao, CEO of the Zhao Group, her husband of 3 years, was awake after the car crash. His eyes were sharp, confused, searching for meaning in a world suddenly unfamiliar. When she had whispered, "Ethan, it's me," he had only frowned. "Who are you?" he'd asked. "Why are you crying?" The words sliced through her like glass. The doctors had said the impact had caused retrograde amnesia. He had lost memories from the last few years. Ironically, the very years they had spent together. Everything they'd built, every fight, every kiss, every promise, wiped away. His mother, Madame Zhao, arrived moments later, elegant in black silk and pearls, her eyes cold as polished stone. When she saw Lila, she offered no comfort, only a thin smile. "Miss Chen," she said smoothly, as if addressing a stranger. "It would be best if you stopped distressing him. Ethan's mind is fragile right now." "Miss Chen," Lila repeated, her voice barely audible. "I'm his wife." A quiet laugh escaped the older woman. "Wife? Don't be ridiculous. You were a companion at best. We let you stay out of pity after you helped him during his first burnout. But marriage? That's absurd." Lila's knees almost gave out. She looked to the doctor for support, but even he avoided her gaze. When she turned back toward the bed, Ethan was watching her, expression wary, uncertain. "Mother, is that true?" he asked softly. "She's not my wife." Madame Zhao placed a hand on his shoulder, maternal and rehearsed. "Of course not. You've been too busy with work to think about marriage. She's exaggerating." Something in Lila broke then, a soundless, invisible shatter. She wanted to scream, to drag out the marriage certificate, to show him the ring on her finger, the photos from their wedding in Santorini. But his blank stare told her it would mean nothing. The Ethan she knew, her Ethan, was gone. That night, she sat alone in the hospital garden. The city lights of Aurelia shimmered in the glass windows above her, reflected in her unshed tears. Somewhere inside that building, her husband slept peacefully, untouched by the memories that haunted her. The next morning, she tried once more. She walked into his room with a trembling smile and a bouquet of his favorite white tulips. "Ethan," she said gently, "you always liked these." "I told you," Madame Zhao interrupted coldly from his bedside. "You are not welcome here." Ethan looked between them, visibly uncomfortable. "Miss Chen, I appreciate your concern, but I think it's best if you leave. I don't want to cause a scene." "Miss Chen." He said it again, firmly this time. And something final settled in the space between them. Lila stared at him for a long, breathless moment. Her fingers clenched around the tulips until the stems snapped. She swallowed the tears, the rage, the memories. "Understood, Mr. Zhao," she said quietly. "Please, take care of yourself." And she walked out, without looking back. The ring slipped from her grasp, landing on the sterile white floor with a faint metallic sound. No one noticed. By the time she stepped into the cold night, she was no longer Ethan Zhao's wife. She was just another woman erased from his world. 3 days after Ethan Zhao's awakening, Lila's name was erased from the Zhao family's world. It began quietly. Her access card to the penthouse stopped working. Then her phone line was disconnected. The company car that used to pick her up for charity events never arrived again. Each small disappearance felt like a confirmation of what Madame Zhao had said. "You were never one of us." She returned to the house she and Ethan had once shared. Or rather, the mansion he had bought and she had tried to fill with warmth. The guards didn't even let her through the gate. "Orders from the chairman," one said with a look of pity. "I'm sorry, Miss Chen." Miss Chen. The title burned in her ears. She tried to reason, to explain. "I'm his wife, legally, But the gate shut before she could finish. Inside, behind the iron bars, she saw the faint glow of their bedroom window. The curtains fluttered in the evening breeze, exactly as they had when she used to wait for him to come home late at night. Only now, there was no waiting, just silence, and a memory that no longer belonged to anyone but her. The next morning, she received a call from the Zhao family lawyer. His voice was courteous but empty. "Miss Chen, the family wishes to express gratitude for your past assistance to Mr. Zhao. They have prepared a settlement for your cooperation and discretion." Lila's fingers tightened around the phone. "Settlement?" A sum for your departure. In exchange, you'll sign a confidentiality agreement and relinquish any claim to the Zhao estate or name. She laughed softly, a small, broken sound. So that's it. They rewrite the story, and I disappear. The lawyer hesitated. Miss Chen, please understand. The family is only trying to protect Mr. Zhao's recovery. By erasing his wife, she whispered. That night, she sat in her tiny studio apartment, the one she had rented years ago, before marriage. The city outside buzzed with life, neon lights flashing across the glass, mocking her solitude. On the table before her lay the agreement, the check, and the pen. She read the words again and again, until they blurred into nothing. Then she signed. Madame Zhao personally came to collect the document. Dressed in flawless ivory, she looked every bit the queen of the Zhao dynasty. You made the right choice, she said calmly. Ethan will heal faster without confusion. You should be grateful we're handling this quietly. Lila met her gaze. Grateful. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. I saved his life in that crash. I was the one behind the wheel when he refused to let the driver take us home. And now you call me confusion. Madame Zhao's lips curved faintly. And yet, despite all that, he doesn't remember you. Perhaps that says everything. The words hit harder than any slap. When the older woman left, Lila packed her last suitcase in silence. Every photo, every memento, every trace of their life together, gone. She stood by the window for a final glance at the skyline. Somewhere in one of those glittering towers, her husband lived as if she had never existed. I'll start over, she whispered to herself. Without him. Without any of them. She took one last look at the ring she had once worn with pride. Then she slipped it into the drawer, locked the door, and walked out. 5 years later, the name Lila Chen had vanished from Aurelia's gossip columns. In her place, a new name had risen through the ranks of corporate legend. Lila Wen, CEO of Aurum Dynamics, a rising competitor to Zhao Group. She was no longer the timid woman who'd once loved a man more than herself. Now, when people spoke her name, they used words like fearless, calculating, and untouchable. The past was buried. Or so she thought, until the day her company received an invitation. A business summit hosted by Zhao Group. And the keynote speaker? Ethan Zhao. 5 years later, Aurelia City gleamed brighter than ever, its skyline piercing the clouds like a testament to ambition and greed. In the heart of it stood the glass tower of Aurum Dynamics, a company built from nothing but willpower, and a woman's heartbreak. Lila Wen stepped out of the elevator onto the top floor, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. The office was sleek, minimal, and cold, just the way she liked it. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a perfect view of the Zhao Group headquarters across the river. A poetic coincidence. Or maybe fate's cruel sense of humor. President Wen, her assistant, Mai, said as she entered. The invitation arrived from Zhao Group. The summit's in 3 days. You're on the list of speakers. Lila accepted the folder calmly. Inside, the golden seal of the Zhao family gleamed beneath the glassy paper. She traced the name Ethan Zhao printed above hers, her fingers stilling for a moment. Her pulse betrayed her, one small, unsteady flutter. Prepare the materials, she said coolly, sliding the document back. And book the suite at the Aurelia Grand. The company dinner will be hosted there after the summit. Yes, President Wen. When Mai left, Lila allowed herself a single breath, long and shaky. 5 years. 5 years since that night she'd walked away with nothing but a broken heart and a name that wasn't hers anymore. In those years, she'd studied, worked, fought, and clawed her way to the top. Every humiliation had become a stepping stone. Every tear had been fuel. The woman who once begged to be remembered had died in that hospital corridor. Now, she didn't need to be remembered. She needed to be respected. Across the river, in the Zhao Group boardroom, Ethan Zhao sat at the head of the long mahogany table. The years had chiseled sharper lines into his face, giving him a colder, more formidable presence. Yet behind his eyes was something darker, restlessness, perhaps, or an ache he couldn't name. His assistant handed him the final list of summit participants. He glanced over it absently, until one name caught his attention. Lila Wen, CEO, Aurum Dynamics. He froze. Who is this? He asked, his tone deceptively calm. Lila Wen, the assistant replied. A rising business figure. Her company started as a tech consultancy but now rivals ours in software and AI development. Some say she's the reason Zhao Group's Western branch lost last year's government contract. Ethan's fingers tightened around the paper. Interesting, he murmured. Make sure she's seated near the front. I want to meet her. The assistant hesitated. Sir, her team requested a separate table. A faint smirk curved Ethan's lips. Then I'll make sure our paths cross. He didn't know why the name bothered him so much, why it stirred something raw and distant inside. There was no memory attached to it. Just a faint, inexplicable ache. 3 nights later, the Aurelia Grand Hotel shimmered beneath chandeliers of crystal and gold. The business summit had drawn the city's elite, and every eye turned when Lila Wen entered. She wore a sleek black gown, simple yet impossibly elegant. Her long hair was pinned in a low twist, exposing the curve of her neck. Every movement she made was controlled, poised, like a queen who had learned to wield silence as a weapon. Conversations faltered as she passed. Even those who didn't know her name could feel the quiet authority she carried. And then she saw him. Across the ballroom, under the cascade of light, stood Ethan Zhao. For a moment, time bent around her. He looked the same, sharper, perhaps, older, his gaze more distant. But the sight of him still hit like a punch to the chest. She told herself to look away, to walk past. But his eyes had already found hers. He froze mid-conversation, his hand pausing halfway to his glass. The room around them blurred into insignificance. Why does she look so familiar? The thought flickered in Ethan's mind, unbidden. Her face stirred something deep, something half-remembered and almost painful. Their gazes locked for one heartbeat too long. Then she smiled, polite, distant, professional, and walked right past him. Ethan turned, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. He didn't know her. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt as if he'd lost something he couldn't name. The next morning, the annual Aurelia Business Summit buzzed with energy. Reporters swarmed the Grand Hall, cameras flashing, journalists murmuring about mergers, innovations, and rumors of secret alliances. But the true spectacle wasn't the event itself. It was the silent, invisible tension between Zhao Group and Aurum Dynamics. At the center of it all sat Ethan Zhao, calm, composed, unreadable, and directly across from him, Lila Wen, elegant and cold in her ivory suit. When the host introduced the panelists, her name was announced last. She rose with a smile, the same graceful control that made even her competitors hesitate to speak first. Ms. Wen, the host said, your company has grown faster than any in recent years. What's your strategy for success? Lila's gaze flicked across the audience, finally landing, deliberately, on Ethan. My strategy, she said softly. Learning how to start over when everything you believed in is taken from you. There was a faint pause. The audience, unaware of the undercurrent, applauded politely. But Ethan's fingers tightened on his glass. That voice, it stirred something deep, a chord half buried in fog. For the rest of the panel, he couldn't stop watching her. The precision of her words. The measured calm in her tone. The haunting familiarity of her gestures, like echoes of a dream he once lived but couldn't recall. When the session ended, executives flocked to her, eager to court alliances. She greeted them with professional charm, answering questions with poise. But when she felt his gaze from across the room, she turned, just slightly, and met it. Their eyes held again. This time, there was no polite smile. Just silence. A silence sharp enough to cut. Later, in the marble corridor outside the conference hall, Ethan finally caught up with her. Ms. Wen. His voice carried the authority that made subordinates flinch. A moment, please. Lila paused, then turned slowly, her expression calm. Mr. Zhao. He studied her face up close, the delicate line of her jaw, the subtle curve of her mouth. Something inside him shifted, painfully. Have we met before? He asked. The question hung between them like smoke. Her lips curved slightly, but her eyes were glacial. I doubt it, Mr. Zhao. If we had, I'm sure you would have remembered. He frowned. You just seem familiar. I suppose successful people often look alike, she replied lightly. Confidence leaves an impression. Her tone was polite, but distant. Perfectly measured. It infuriated him in ways he couldn't explain. When he didn't reply, she tilted her head. Was there something else? Yes, he said after a pause. Aurum Dynamics has been competing aggressively for several of our government contracts. You've made quite an impact. She met his gaze evenly. Business is about merit, not legacy. Wouldn't you agree? That subtle jab didn't escape him. His lips curved. Legacy has its advantages. Not everyone can build an empire from scratch. No, she said quietly. Some have to lose everything before they learn how. And with that, she walked away. He stood there long after she disappeared into the crowd, her perfume faint in the air. His chest tightened with something between curiosity and unease. He didn't understand why the thought of her walking away left him hollow. That night, at the summit dinner, they crossed paths again. The ballroom shimmered with champagne and chandeliers, but the undercurrent was sharp, alliances forming, deals whispered behind crystal glasses. Ethan was surrounded by investors when a familiar voice drifted through the crowd. Mr. Zhao. He turned. Lila stood there, holding a glass of red wine, a faint, unreadable smile playing on her lips. Ms. Wen, he greeted, his tone cool but his pulse quickening. I was hoping we'd speak again. I'm sure you were, she replied softly. Aurum Dynamics and Zhao Group are bound to collide sooner or later. His smile deepened. I don't see why we have to collide. We could cooperate. Cooperate? Her brow lifted. You mean absorb? He chuckled. Business can be both. Not mine, she said simply. Aurum doesn't belong to anyone but me. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Admiration, perhaps, or the echo of a memory. You remind me of someone, he said suddenly, almost to himself. Her hand froze on the glass. Then she looked up, her voice smooth but edged with frost. Be careful with memories, Mr. Zhao. They're unreliable. And before he could respond, she turned and walked away again, graceful, untouchable, unstoppable. Ethan watched her go, the faintest ache building behind his ribs. He didn't know it yet, but the walls he'd built for 5 years were beginning to crack. Aurelia City moved fast, but business moved faster. Within a week of the summit, the rivalry between Aurum Dynamics and Zhao Group dominated every headline. Contracts once guaranteed to Zhao Group were now being contested. Investors whispered that Aurum's sudden momentum had shaken the market. For the first time in years, Ethan Zhao felt the edges of his empire tremble. And at the center of it all was Lila Wen, the woman whose face haunted his nights and whose voice echoed in his mind long after their conversations ended. Sir, Aurum's proposal outbid us again, said his assistant grimly. They're presenting a new AI infrastructure plan to the ministry tomorrow. It could replace our long-term partnership. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Set up a meeting. I want to see what Ms. Wen is playing at. Should I schedule a formal appointment? No, he said, a cold smile forming. I'll visit her personally. The next afternoon, Lila's office at Aurum Dynamics was flooded with late sunlight when the receptionist called to announce his arrival. President Wen, Mr. Ethan Zhao is here to see you. Her pen paused mid-signature. For a brief moment, her heartbeat stumbled. Then she composed herself. Send him in. When the door opened, he walked in with his usual calm arrogance, tailored suit, unreadable eyes. The air seemed to thin with his presence. Mr. Zhao, she said smoothly. I didn't expect Zhao Group CEO to make house calls. He smirked faintly. I don't like losing, Ms. Wen. I prefer to understand my opponents. Opponents? She leaned back in her chair, lips curving. I thought we were just in the same industry. Don't play coy, he said softly. You're not competing for the market. You're competing with me. Her eyes flashed. You assume too much, Mr. Zhao. Not everything revolves around you. He stepped closer, resting his hands on the edge of her desk. You're bold. Most people in this city bend when I walk into the room. Then perhaps you should stop confusing fear with respect, she replied. The words hit their mark. For a heartbeat, his composure faltered, and something unguarded flashed through his expression. Then, quietly, why do you hate me so much? The question caught her off guard. Her throat tightened. For a split second, she almost let the truth spill out. The pain, the betrayal, the years she spent rebuilding herself from the ashes of his indifference. But she smiled instead, cool and flawless. Hate requires emotion. Mr. Zhao. You don't matter that much. Ethan studied her, searching for a crack in her calm exterior, but found none. You're lying, he said finally, almost to himself. There's something about you, something I should remember. She looked away. Memory is a fragile thing. Don't strain yourself trying to fix it. He straightened slowly. I will remember, he said, his voice low and certain. And when I do, I want the truth. Lila met his gaze. The truth, she said softly, was buried the day you let them erase me. He frowned. What? Nothing, she said quickly. Good day, Mr. Zhao. He left reluctantly, his thoughts a tangle of confusion and restless curiosity. As the elevator doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of her standing by the window, her silhouette framed in light, her shoulders perfectly still. Why did his chest ache when he looked at her? Why did her name taste like déjà vu? That night, Lila sat alone in her apartment overlooking the city. The lights shimmered below, reflected in her untouched glass of wine. She'd told herself she'd moved on, that seeing him again meant nothing. But when she'd looked into his eyes earlier, for a moment she'd seen the man she used to love, the one who used to make her laugh, who used to whisper promises in the dark. And then she'd remembered how easily he had believed the lies. She pressed a hand against her chest, breathing slowly, forcing the ache back down where it belonged. He doesn't deserve your tears, she whispered to herself. Not anymore. Still, the memory wouldn't stop. The look on his face when she'd said the truth was buried. It had been confusion, yes, but also something deeper. Something like regret. For the first time in years, she wondered what he would do if he did remember. Would he come to her again? Or would he walk away, just like before? The night after his meeting with Lila, Ethan Zhao didn't sleep. He sat alone in his penthouse office, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass wall. The documents before him lay forgotten. His mind replayed her voice, her words, sharp yet trembling beneath their calm. The truth was buried the day you let them erase me. The sentence wouldn't leave him. He didn't even know what it meant, but something in it struck too close to a place he hadn't touched in years. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small, locked box. Inside were fragments of a life before the accident. Photos, receipts, notes. He'd looked through them dozens of times, trying to fill the empty 3 years he couldn't remember. Tonight, for the first time, he noticed a photograph he'd never paid attention to. A picture of him standing by a seaside cliff, arm around a woman whose face was turned toward the sun. The photo was faded, edges torn, but her silhouette, her hair, the slope of her neck, felt achingly familiar. He leaned closer. It wasn't possible. The woman in the photo looked exactly like Lila Wen. His breath caught. He flipped the photo over. On the back, faint writing in his own hand. Santorini, our honeymoon. Honeymoon. Ethan stared at the word until it blurred. He had no memory of such a trip. He'd never been to Santorini, had he? His pulse quickened as fragmented flashes flickered through his mind. White sands, laughter carried by the sea wind, a woman's soft voice calling his name. He stood abruptly, knocking the photo to the floor. Who was she? Who was Lila Wen? Meanwhile, across the river, Lila sat in her dimly lit apartment, a storm raging quietly in her chest. Ever since Ethan's visit, her composure had begun to crack. Seeing him again had been like standing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong breath, and she'd tumble back into the past she swore she'd buried. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. MEI, President Wen, Zhao Group just requested a joint proposal meeting for tomorrow. Should I decline? Lila's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Decline, she told herself. Keep the distance. But instead, she typed. Lila, accept. Her reflection in the dark glass window stared back at her, cold and composed. You can face him once more, she whispered. He's just another businessman now. But deep down, she knew it was a lie. The next day, the conference room at Aurum was quiet when Ethan arrived. Lila was already there, reviewing a set of charts. She didn't look up until his shadow fell across the table. Mr. Zhao, she said, her tone calm. You're early. I had trouble sleeping, he replied. She lifted an eyebrow. That seems like a personal issue, not a business one. He almost smiled at her sharpness. I found something, he said instead, reaching into his briefcase. When he placed the photograph on the table, her composure shattered. For a moment, neither spoke. The image lay between them, him, smiling, carefree, and her, sunlight in her hair. Her throat tightened. Where did you get that? It was in my things. I don't remember when or why it was taken. His gaze searched hers. But that's you, isn't it? Lila said nothing. Ethan leaned forward. Who are you to me, really? Her fingers trembled as she reached for the photo, tracing the word honeymoon. You wouldn't believe me even if I told you, she whispered. Try me, he said quietly. When she finally looked up, her eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with 5 years of silence. Once, I was your wife. The words hung heavy in the air. Ethan went completely still. That's not possible. My mother said. Your mother lied, she cut in, her voice trembling. After the accident, she told you I was a fraud. That I used you for money. You believed her. You told me to leave. And I did. He stared at her, stunned. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. No, that can't be. You asked me to go, she said softly. You called me Miss Chen. You didn't even know my name. Her words pierced straight through him. Images, blurred and broken, flashed in his mind, the smell of her perfume, the echo of her laughter, a white dress beneath the sun. His hand shook. Lila, he breathed, the name tasting both foreign and familiar. She stepped back, forcing calm into her voice. You don't have to remember. I didn't come back for you. I came back for myself. And before he could speak again, she walked past him, leaving him alone with the photograph trembling in his hand. That night, Ethan stood by his window, unable to tear his eyes from the skyline. Her name echoed in his mind again and again. Lila. He didn't know how much of her story was true. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had forgotten her once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Ethan Zhao spent the next week chasing ghosts. The photograph haunted him until he could no longer work. He began searching through old hard drives, archived calendars, company logs, anything that might prove or disprove Lila's words. Every discovery drew him deeper into a maze of half-deleted files and locked records. Then one night, in a forgotten folder labeled private, he found a digital contract. Marriage certificate. Ethan Zhao and Lila Chen, registered 3 years before the accident. His pulse thundered. Beneath it was a note in his mother's handwriting. File to be sealed. Do not disclose. Doctor agrees memory will fade. He read it again, slower this time, each word a knife. Doctor agrees memory will fade. His mother had known. She'd helped bury his marriage. The next morning, he confronted her. Madame Zhao sat in her private garden, trimming white orchids. The air smelled sweet and cruel. Mother, he said quietly. I found the certificate. Her shears stilled. I wondered when you would. So it's true, he said, voice low. Lila Chen was my wife. She was an inconvenience, Madame Zhao answered without flinching. A woman from nowhere. You were sick, overworked. She took advantage of you. When the accident erased her, I simply protected you from another mistake. Protected. His laugh was brittle. You erased my life. I saved your legacy, she snapped. That girl had no place in our family. You should thank me. Ethan stared at her, the realization settling like poison. You destroyed her. You destroyed us. Madame Zhao's expression softened, almost pitying. You can't change the past, Ethan. Forget her again. That's the only way forward. But he was already walking away. He found Lila at the Aurum Dynamics rooftop terrace that evening, overseeing the installation of a new sign. She looked radiant under the floodlights, commanding, untouchable. Lila, he called. She turned slowly. Mr. Zhao. To what do I owe this surprise? He didn't speak at first. He simply held out the marriage certificate. Her breath caught. Where did you? I found it, he said. And I found everything else. My mother's lies. The doctor's notes. The settlement you were forced to sign. Her fingers trembled as she took the paper. For a moment, she couldn't look at him. So now you know. Yes. His voice was rough. And I'm sorry. She laughed softly, bitterly. Sorry? Do you have any idea what I went through after you threw me away? How it felt to stand in a hospital room while the man I loved looked at me like a stranger? I remember now, he whispered. Bits and pieces. The ocean, the vows, your smile. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. Memories can't undo what happened. I want to make it right, he said. Come back to me. Let me try. She looked at him for a long moment, the city wind catching her hair. Come back, she repeated softly. You think we can simply return to what we were? Why not? We loved each other once. That woman loved you, she said, touching her chest. The one who waited through your meetings, who believed your promises. She died the day you forgot her. I'm not her anymore. He stepped closer. Then let me know this you. Her eyes filled despite herself. You don't understand. I spent years building a life that didn't depend on your name. Every success I have, every scar, I earned it because you left me no choice. I know, he said softly. And that's exactly why I can't stop loving you. The confession hung between them, raw and unguarded. For a heartbeat, she almost believed it, almost reached for him. Then she forced herself to step back. You remember the past, Ethan. But that doesn't mean we have a future. He caught her hand. Lila. Don't, she whispered. You taught me what forgetting feels like. I won't teach it to you in return. Her fingers slipped from his grasp. When she was gone, the rooftop felt colder. Ethan stood alone beneath the flickering lights, the city humming far below. He had found the truth. He had found her. And yet, somehow, he had lost her all over again. A light autumn rain fell over Aurelia, turning the glass towers into mirrors. From his office window, Ethan Zhao watched the droplets slide down the pane until they blurred the city into a watercolor of silver and gray. In the reflection he looked older, tired, almost human again. He hadn't spoken to Lila since the night on the rooftop. He'd sent flowers that came back unopened, letters that were returned unread. The silence between them had grown into something living, something that pressed against his ribs every time he breathed. Tonight, he decided it had to end. Across the river, the lights of Aurum Dynamics burned late. Lila sat in her office surrounded by files she wasn't reading, the hum of the air conditioner filling the empty room. She'd spent the last week convincing herself she'd done the right thing, that walking away had been strength, not cowardice. But when the door opened and Ethan stepped in, soaked from the rain, the air seemed to stop. She didn't ask how he'd gotten past security. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. I had to see you, he replied, water dripping from his hair onto the carpet. Just once more, without the lies, without the company between us. Lila stood, crossing her arms to hide the tremor in her hands. We said everything that needed to be said. Not everything. He took a step forward, his voice low. I remember more now. The hospital. The sound of your voice begging me to remember. I can't erase what I did to you. You didn't do it, she said, turning away. You forgot. That's not a crime. It became one when I chose to believe them instead of you. Silence. Only the rain against the windows. Finally, she asked, what do you want from me, Ethan? He swallowed. Forgiveness. The word hung between them, fragile as glass. Lila let out a shaky breath. You think forgiveness is something you can just ask for? Like a deal? No, he said. I think it's something I have to earn. But I can't start unless you tell me there's a chance. She turned then, and he saw tears she refused to let fall. I spent years hating you. Then I spent years trying not to. Somewhere in between, I realized I didn't need either. I just needed peace. Then let me give you that, he said. You can't, she whispered. Peace isn't something you give. It's something I had to find on my own. And I did. He hesitated. So this is goodbye. It has been, for a long time. Ethan looked around the office, the trophies, the framed awards, the quiet strength that filled the space. Everything she had built from nothing. You're incredible, he said softly. I should have told you that years ago. A faint smile curved her lips. You told me once, she murmured. On our wedding day. He exhaled, almost a laugh, almost a sob. Do you ever think about it? Every now and then, she admitted. But memories are like scars, they stop bleeding, even if they never disappear. He stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her. If I'd remembered sooner. She shook her head. You didn't. And maybe that's fate's way of saying we were never meant to last. Ethan closed his eyes. You deserved a better ending. This is the better ending, she said gently. We both survived. For a moment, they simply stood there, the city lights flickering across their faces. Then she reached for his hand, one brief, trembling touch. I forgive you, she said at last. But I can't love you the way I used to. He nodded, eyes shining. I wouldn't ask you to. She let his hand go. Goodbye, Ethan. He turned toward the door, then paused. Take care of yourself, Lila. A soft smile. I already am. When he was gone, Lila walked to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets below washed clean. Somewhere in the distance, she could see the Zhao Group tower glowing faintly through the mist. She pressed her palm to the glass, not in longing, but in farewell. For the first time in years, her heart was quiet. A year later, Spring returned to Aurelia City. The cherry blossoms lining the river bloomed pale pink against the glass skyline, scattering petals over the water like memories that refused to sink. Lila Wen walked slowly through the riverside park, her phone buzzing with messages she didn't check. Aurum Dynamics was stronger than ever, its name whispered with admiration across the corporate world. Success looked good on her. Freedom, even better. Yet the quiet ache inside her never fully disappeared, it had only changed shape. She stopped by a small cafe overlooking the bridge, ordered her usual jasmine tea, and sat by the window. She used to come here often years ago, back when she still wore a ring, back when she waited for a man who always came too late. Now she simply came for the peace. The bell over the door rang softly. She didn't look up until a familiar shadow fell across her table. Lila. Her hand froze on the teacup. She looked up slowly, and there he was. Ethan Zhao. He looked different. The sharp arrogance in his face had softened. His hair was flecked with grey at the temples, and his suit was simpler than she remembered. But his eyes, the same steady, searching eyes, met hers with quiet warmth. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty seat. She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." He sat, folding his hands on the table. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It was gentle, familiar. "I heard about your new project," he said finally. "Aurum's solar expansion. It's impressive." "Thank you," she replied. "And Zhao Group? I read about your foundation. Helping small entrepreneurs. That's unexpected." A faint smile curved his lips. "I had a good example to follow." Her chest tightened, but she smiled back. "You've changed." "So have you." For a moment, they simply watched each other, the way people do when words are too fragile to hold everything they mean. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to thank you. After that night, after you forgave me, I started seeing things differently. The company, my family, myself. I think you gave me the courage to start over." "I didn't give you anything," she said softly. "You found it yourself." He nodded. "Maybe. But you were the reason I looked." Outside, a breeze swept through the park, scattering petals against the glass. One drifted through the open window and landed between them on the table. She stared at it, the delicate pink curl of it, fragile yet alive. "I thought I'd forgotten what peace felt like," she murmured. "Now, sometimes, I do remember." Ethan watched her, his voice quiet. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But only when I'm grateful for what is. We had something beautiful once, even if it didn't last." He smiled faintly. "It was real." It was. They sat like that for a while, two people who had loved and lost and healed. No bitterness remained, only the soft ache of understanding. When she finally stood, he rose too. "You're leaving." "I have a flight," she said, adjusting her coat. "Aurum's opening a branch overseas. It's time for a new chapter." He nodded slowly. "You always did know how to move forward." "And you," she said, "finally learned how to let go." He laughed quietly, a sound that used to make her heart race. "Maybe. But I'll never forget you again, Lila." She met his eyes, steady, unflinching. "You don't have to forget. Just don't stop living." He hesitated, then reached out. For a brief, fragile moment, their hands met. No promises, no pleas, just the warmth of everything they had been and everything they had become. "Goodbye, Ethan." "Goodbye, Lila." She turned and walked out into the sunlight, petals swirling around her like confetti from a wedding that existed only in memory. He watched until she disappeared into the crowd, a small, peaceful smile touching his lips. Some loves don't end. They simply change form. From passion, to memory, to blessing. And so ended the story of the CEO's forgotten wife. Not with reunion, but with forgiveness. And the quiet grace of letting go.